Today on Clear Your Clutter Inside and Out, we're talking about releasing sentimental clutter. Do you have stuff sitting in boxes in your basement that you've never opened, but you can't part with the boxes because they belong to someone you love? Have you found yourself running out of space because you can't seem to let go of stuff filled with memories? Are you able to discern what's worth keeping and what isn't? Learn tips for releasing nostalgic clutter as we continue our month focusing on all you need is love. Do you control your clutter or does your clutter control you? On Clear Your Clutter Inside and Out, we'll teach you awareness as well as action steps to create change in your life. Come on, let's get started. Today's episode was inspired because we will be moving again. So that's 2 years ago we moved and downsized, and then life happened, and in a good way, it all works out as it should. So we're going to be moving again. So I have gone through clutter, kind of a big downsizing round, and now on round 2. I also wanted to talk about today because last year, people had a little more time to evaluate. Many of us found ourselves at home more. And a lot of times when we're in crisis, we get more sentimental, we get more nostalgic. Last year, some of you might have been like, hey, man, I can just clear all this out. This is really great. I feel really invigorated. Some of you might have been really overwhelmed and felt that you needed to hold on to stuff more, especially things that have memories or create nostalgia or create sentiment. And it was more challenging for you to let that go. And of course, that's understandable. And I want to say to remind you that it is a process to release sentimental clutter. You know, when we had to put Athena down, they lit a little candle. And I let it go down about halfway. And when we move and get settled, we had her cremated. I have her in a little box, and we will have our own pet cemetery someday. But I just felt I can't explain it if you don't own a pet. They are like my babies. And I said, we're not leaving her in North Carolina. We're taking her to West Virginia. Anyhow, I have a little half that you can get, I'm sure, at the dollar store. But I want to, when we go, settle her in, light the candle, and bring her to West Virginia with us. So that's some sentimental clutter I'm holding on to. I'll be able to release it someday or repurpose it because I like candles. But it's a process. I wouldn't expect myself to be able to release things that, especially when I'm grieving. And so I want you to remember that. I had a client that lost a child. I can't even imagine what that would be like. It was incredibly painful to lose an animal that I loved. And she lost a child as a baby and had to go through a process before she was able to release the crib. The baby had been our last child, and so she had no longer had a need for a crib. And it was a process, and it took several years before she finally was able to say, I know that someone else who needs this crib and can use it, and was able to let it go. So just be gentle with yourself during this process. I wanted to make sure that I told you that. Of course, it's pretty easiest to see that sentimental clutter can create physical clutter. It can also create mental clutter. I had a client once that had a basement full of stuff that belonged to her parents, and she never opened anything and wasn't willing to let it go. So that created mental strain. It also created strain within the relationship because there was a lot of tension. This whole basement is filled with stuff that's not being used, and it created tension in the marriage. Sentimental clutter can also create emotional clutter because it really keeps you in the past. And for some people, that doesn't allow them to move forward. And if you are surrounded by a bunch of stuff, that can also lead to clutter because clutter can cause depression, and depression can cause clutter. I'm excited. We have a guest today. Have Rachel back on the podcast. Love Rachel. She's authentic. She keeps it real. Did an episode or two with her previously. If you just go and search Rachel on YouTube or the podcast, you should be able to pop it up and find her. She is a fellow podcaster. She has a great podcast organized. I've been on that a couple times. And it takes special people to work with hoarders. I volunteered once when I first started my business and actually kind of organized it for the area. And it was really, I found it really heartbreaking. And so people who work with hoarders like Rachel are special angels on this earth. They're special people because it takes a lot to do this. You know, I'm sure through COVID has been able to work because she would be, I'd call it hazmat gear. That's probably not the proper term, but because they're health hazards, sometimes working with hoarders, she, I'm sure, has been able to work through everything with COVID and continue to work there. But it really takes not just the physical part, because at my age, that would be a lot, but you need to be a loving person. You need to hold space for emotions that comes up. So many times hoarders have been treated so poorly and dismissed that it does just take someone who's really special to do that. So let me tell you about today's guest. Rachel Seavey has been a professional organizer for over a decade and has helped thousands of people create order within their home. Rachel organizes homes and living spaces for residents and business owners in the San Francisco Bay Area. Rachel's specialty is chronic disorganization, hoarding disorder, and life changes. Rachel's media appearances include the Emmy-nominated A&E series Hoarders, the CBS Sunday Morning Show, and the Lady Brain Show. When Rachel is not clutter coaching, organizing, or podcasting, she's with her son, dogs, and bearded dragon, living life and having fun. And I just have to say, Rachel's son, Shane, is adorable, and he has the best hair ever. Welcome, Rachel.
Hey, Julie. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
I'm excited because we're going to be talking about sentimental clutter and nostalgic clutter today. So what do you consider sentimental clutter?
I think there are a few different things. I definitely have observed that people like to hang on to items that remind them of other people or a time in their life when things might have been better, or just a time in their life that they remember or cherish. And it could be something very sentimental, somebody that's passed away has left behind, but it could also be things like concert t-shirts or magnets from every place they've traveled. Like I've seen a wide array of items that people hang on to because they find them sentimental.
You had mentioned, which was a moment of aha for me, that one of the reasons, because I haven't experienced this, and maybe because you work with hoarders, that you said that people are going to hold on to the nostalgia because it reminded them of a time when life was better. I think that's a great insight that I wouldn't have thought of. So what other reasons do you find that people hold on to sentimental items?
I noticed that people hang on to items that were given to them as a gift, and they might not even like the item, but somebody that they really like gave it to them, or something that really represents who they are or what they feel about, like a foundation that they support. It's hard for people to get rid of items that were given to them by somebody that's important or a place that was important to them. So I think they save these items because it represents what's important to them or who that person is. But a lot of the times they don't even like the item, which I find very interesting.
Well, one of the things I've started to do is when I give a gift, I say, look, I've done my best, but if you don't like it, please regift it, make some money from it. I mean, do whatever you're comfortable with, because I want to take that burden off of people. And the other thing I started to do was I found, and this happened when I got married. I found that I had held on to something that I'm no longer friends with the person. And I thought, what are you doing? And so I like to recycle everything or I like to give it away. And in this, because this gift was made for us for our wedding and it could only be used for me and Tony. I'm like, I just have to pitch it because the mental exhaustion of seeing that in the home outweighed my desire to recycle everything. And so have you found that maybe people have been in my position and hold on to something with someone they don't like?
Oh yeah. No, I've done that. And those items are toxic in a way because you just quickly think about that time that they, screwed you over or whatever the falling out was. Like you go directly there. Like, oh, there's, the shirt that such and such gave me. And so I like to get those things out of my closet, but and it just feels better. It's just like a huge weight off of your shoulders and it makes room in your closet. But I'm even guilty of that as well. I mean, you just hang on to these items because they remind you of something. And it's not even that you like the item and you're definitely not using the item.
What would you say to someone? How can you help them release it? Like, what would you say? Okay, I know you're challenged here. How can we let go of the sentimental stuff?
I like to have people take photos, digital photos. That seems to really help with things like kids' artwork. A lot of parents, I'm actually pretty good about it, but I post things on Facebook like this is what Shane did at school this
Mm.
week. And then I feel like it's gotten its attention or whatever, it's been valued and the thing can go. And if I want to look at it again, I can just go on Facebook or I can go on my phone and try and find it. It's really hard for people to get rid of antiques or heirlooms or things that they were handed down for generations. Those I feel like are the hardest. And so I always encourage people to use them. If your great grandmother's china isn't serving you well in a box in the garage that you're not even touching, and if you can't even bear to think about getting rid of it, use it. Why not? And so I do have clients send me photos of them using their best china, which is sandwiches and things, because otherwise you're just keeping it and you're not enjoying it and it's really lost its value. And so if you can't get rid of something sentimental, try and use it, or perhaps ask a friend or a family member if they want it. Really try and get it to be valued and appreciated rather than just sitting in the back of a closet or sitting in a buffet that you never use. So that's my advice.
Well, here's a pro tip for listening. Brown furniture, i.e., antique furniture, you can't sell and make money. So when we downsized last year, I had someone, it was worth it. They took, I think, 40%, but they hauled it off. And he was like, we made a couple $100. So I had to put it in perspective. He said, yeah, if you would have sold a decade ago, you would have made 10,000. So sadly, I was off by a decade. But when I first moved here, I bought a house. I was excited, moved here from California. I'm like, woo, I can afford a house. Life is good. And I had a house and no furniture. So this guy was getting married, and his wife's like, get rid of the antique stuff from your mom. So the old house had, a formal living room, which thank God we don't have now because I don't need that. And anyway, so I got it and I paid for all the whole set, and another chair I got paid $800. So I looked at it like, well, you rented it for 12 years, so at least you made a couple $100. But what they told me, they said, kids these days aren't buying the antiques. So I'm so thrilled that you said use the china. One thing that I'd like you to talk about, how can you help people? And I think you have a lot of experience with this working with hoarders. How do you separate the wheat from the chaff? How do you discern what can be helped? And the example I'll use is I have my grandmother's furniture from when she was a kid, but it's in our guest bedroom. So those are the bed. It's used whenever someone comes over and stays the night. We have used it. Now I also held on to for years. It wasn't china. This is what makes it even worse. My grandmother probably got a free set of dishes working probably opened a bank account in the 50s, right? And gave her and I remember they were daisies because when we would go over the house, we'd use these, but they sat in our basement and were gray. And my dad and my aunts were really great. They wanted everyone to have everything. And I was living in LA and they shipped everything out. But these were gray and yucky and gross. Now I'm using the bedroom furniture and everything. And so I finally had this aha moment. It was actually because I saw Peter Walsh speak before he became famous. And he was like, your grandmother's not in your dishes. And he would say you have the memory in your head. And I would also say you have the memory in your heart. So long-winded point, I was able to let go of the dishes that had no use and were gross and donated them. But someone who didn't have anything could probably clean them up and do something with them and kept the furniture that I use. So what's your advice for people who are struggling with that?
Oh, I love that story. That's great. And I think a lot of people feel the same way. They don't know what is something that they could use or something that they couldn't use. So I definitely would go with your gut feeling right away. Will I be using this item? Will I be appreciating this item? And it sounds like you saw it right away and you were like, not really my thing. So a lot of the times our intuition will give us this nudge, but then we're feeling, guilty, or like you said with the Peter Walsh thing. I mean, you're like associating in your gut that these plates are your grandmother, and you really have to say, hey, this isn't my grandmother. I'm not throwing or giving my grandmother away. And it sounds kind of silly, but really you have to say, am I being realistic here? And so I think going with your intuition, if you have a strong, feeling towards an item. But if you have one question I ask my clients a lot, and I've worked with people here in California in the fires, if a fire hit right now, what would you grab? And usually it's things like, I'd make sure my family is safe and, important documents and things like that, pets for sure. But it's never, my grandmother's gray dishes from the back of the box. And so, just think if you only had, a few minutes to grab things that were really important to you, what would they be? And is this on that list? So that's always a kind of a fun way to think about it. But I love that, you still donated them, the dishes that you didn't use, and you felt good about that. You didn't throw them away. I think some people have a hard time throwing things out. And so if you can find a good resource for it, then that makes it just a little bit easier.
Yeah, I'm challenged. I try to be as green as much as possible. And I can appreciate it when other people do. But that was a huge aha moment for me. I'm like, no, my grandmother isn't in the dishes. And does the thought of clearing your clutter overwhelm you? Clear Your Clutter Inside and Out has 21 standalone chapters to fit your schedule and lifestyle. Stop being afraid, gain clarity, and go at your own pace. The Clear Your Clutter Inside and Out workbook lets you record your thoughts step by step as you go through the book. Free MP3 meditation with purchase. Get control of your clutter so your clutter doesn't control you. Reclaim time, money, sanity, and resources. Learn more at reawakenyourbrilliance.com and also available for purchase on Amazon. When you work with clients, what do you say about the guilt? Because I found that too. Oh, I feel guilty. Like I was joking with one of my aunts about something, and I was like, look, if anyone can come back from heaven and grab me by the collar and be angry at me, it's going to be my grandmother. And and I'm somewhat intelligent, I'm somewhat normal, I know realistically that's not, but those things like guilt can be really have a strong pull. So what would you say to someone that feels guilt?
I would say what feels worse, not having the space to live in and to find things easily, not being able to have people over. The people that I work with, I usually have a lot of stuff. So it's what's more important? your space, your peace of mind, you being, not overspending. And I really try and have them see that it's actually that guilt is holding them back from living this whole other beautiful life that they could be living. And so it's it's almost like a barrier, along with this stuff. The guilt becomes this just like huge wall, and people get stuck, well, it's my grandmother's, or such and
Hmm.
such gave it to me. And it's you just really have to say what's more important here, this stuff, and a lot of times that person isn't even around any longer. They're not going to be mad at you. Realistically, nobody's going to know. Nobody cares. They're managing their own lives and their own stuff. No one's going to but you've kind of created this thing inside of you, and it's a great way to not let go of stuff. But it's also, you really have to recognize it, it's holding you back. And so I just tell people it gets easier as you let go of things, and you start to kind of chuckle like, well, does this person really care if I got, would they even know? And so yeah, you want to investigate all of the feelings and really take it to like, in the future, would I ever even use this item? A lot of the times, no.
And I love also your example of the fires. I mean, what a great thing to say.
Mhm.
If you had a fire, stop and think about that, because unfortunately, that's been reality for people. And I'm with you. I'd grab the pets, my husband, and our wedding album. Those are the three things off the top of my head that I would want to. Everything else, those just boom. That's without thinking about it came to me. So I think that's a really great question that people can ask.
And photographs are very special to people. I'm glad you said your wedding album. That is very hard. And they don't take up much space, but if you have a lot, I mean they do. But getting rid of that photograph can sometimes be sentimental for people because they feel like they're throwing away that time in their life, or they're worried they'll never remember it again. And so, they've got photos of stuff, people aren't even, now you can delete bad photos and stuff,
Right.
but I've seen just stacks and stacks of photos where the photos aren't even that good,
Right.
and people feel really bad throwing them out. So luckily there's scanners now. I tell people if your photos are that important, scan them. Costco will take a bunch of loose photos and put them on a disc. That's what I've done. I don't have time to scan or the patience to scan. So I just take them all to Costco and they're on a disc, and I still don't look at them. But
But decluttering's about steps moving forward, and
it
you've
is.
done that.
It is. And so if you have photographs that are important, that would be my suggestion, because there are some items that you just can't part with. And so always having a photograph or backup photographs or something digital can really be helpful, especially with fires and things, to just, and also to make sure that if there is something that's super sentimental, then make sure that it's accessible if you had to grab it. A lot of the times these things are buried, or they don't even know
Mhm.
where they are, or which box was that in. And so if it's really that special to you, then make sure that you can just quickly grab it if you ever had to.
The other thing I did was I found when I was decluttering photos that I had duplicate. So I sent like from college, I'm like, here you go. Here are duplicates. Do what you want. I thought you might like those because I thought maybe someone, like I knew someone that I grew up with, that they had a house fire and lost everything. And when I heard that, I went through and I said, hey, I had some photos from your wedding. I mean, this was back in the 90s, so we didn't have all the stuff. They're not great, but here, if you can have, if you like these, please, and do what you want if you didn't. But so in that case, that's another option as well.
Yeah. And there's also fun ways to recycle nostalgic items. And I'm thinking of a couple right now, and I hope it's
Oh,
not too off
share. No,
track.
no. Yeah.
I recently, just this month, was working with a woman, and she had this beautiful little bear on her chair displayed. I mean, there was clutter everywhere, but actually this bear was kind of by itself. And I touched it and it was so soft. And I hope this doesn't terrify you, because I know, well, we're both animal lovers. But I said, God, this bear is cute. And it looked like one of those fancy, like Boyd bear
Mhm.
collectible things. And I said, oh, it's so cute. And she said, well, I was going through my mother's stuff and she had a fur coat. And I knew that I couldn't donate it. So somewhere out there on the internet, and if anyone's interested, I'll try and find out where she did it. She had this bear made from the fur coat. And I don't know, I think they kept whatever was left over, so she didn't have to deal with it. And they had the little bow tie, had the monogram from inside. It was lovely. And here it was on display instead of just being a fur coat in the back of a closet that everyone's terrified and mortified about. Here, in the Bay Area, you could get tomatoed or pelted, or who knows if you wore that thing out. But here was this, and they did a lovely job. So somewhere out there in the world, someone will take a fur coat and turn it into a bear. I've also seen concert t-shirt made into a quilt. So things like that, it's like, okay, you've got a whole drawer full of t-shirts you're not using from wherever, or maybe marathons that you've done that were important to you. And, there's somebody out there, I don't know, but there's people out there that make stuff from your nostalgic items. And then you could use it every day on your bed or throw it over a chair and, and actually display the things and use them. So that's always a fun thing.
I love that because that was going to be one of my questions. What creative things? I've also seen, we talked a moment ago about separating the wheat from the chaff. So creating like a cool shadow box. So instead of, having 5 zillion things, what are the 10 or 15 that really encapsulate that experience? And how can you create a shadow box as one
Yeah.
example?
No, those are really fun as well. And I find that a lot of my clients are very creative and they also don't want to add to the landfill. So these are really cool options for people that get stuck with items like this.
And one point that I learned for you, I want to share, and I don't know when you told me this, but I didn't realize in California, you get dinged, you get charged money, right, for the landfill. And so when you dump a bunch of stuff that's maybe junk to a charity that they can't use, that costs them money. Now, if I'm wrong, correct me.
Oh no, it costs me money. If I have good items that I'm dumping, I'm paying to pay for good items and or dump good items. And so the charities, unfortunately, I see them at the dump and it's kind of hard and they're definitely contributing to the landfill with stuff that they don't want.
The one thing I wanted to say is I think we have to acknowledge that we're human beings. And so sometimes our thought processes are very unique. And to someone else, they might sound crazy. Like I was thinking this morning. So all my sentimental stuff fits in one box. I have done a lot of purging and I purge that stuff every couple years. But then I was laughing as I was thinking about this interview. Like I got rid of all my high school yearbooks. I think I picked out a couple pages, but I was like, when do I look at this? I'm like, when I go to a reunion in another 10 years, if I have the hankering, I'll just, so if someone had a flood and they're like, and I said, oh, I'll take it up to my brother's office. You can swing by and pick it up. So I was able to, pass those on to someone that really wanted them. Then I was laughing because I kept my junior high books. Now they're much smaller, but I was like, oh, I'm probably because my ego, because I'm in my junior high yearbooks a lot more. But then as I was thinking about this interview, I'm like, I hated junior high. Junior high sucked. So why am I holding on to these? And I will figure that out in another couple years. But it's just, I think what I'm trying to get at is I want to acknowledge that we have interesting thought processes. And so to honor that, as long as, if I had 20 boxes of junior high memorabilia, then okay, you need to take some time and work on that. But all my stuff literally is in one box. So thoughts on that, just acknowledging that we're interesting people.
Yeah, no, all of my stuff is literally in one box as well. And I do go through it every couple of years. But I have things that I even personally save that really make no sense, and I was thinking that to myself. I'm like, gosh, should I expose myself like that? But it's something honestly that I don't know I can get rid of. When my dad passed away, he left me a couple of beautiful items, which I do display and use and cherish. But then I had ended up with things like his eyeglasses, his watch,
Mm-hmm.
and his favorite sweatshirt. And so I still have them all. And I'm not going to use his eyeglasses, watch, or favorite sweatshirt. Sometimes I'll put the sweatshirt on, but it really kind of makes me sad. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't wear the sweatshirt. And so that's kind of interesting. I mean, I think all of us, and And I know that if I were to get rid of them, I wouldn't be getting rid of him, but it feels like that even for me, even for somebody that's constantly working on this with other people and working on themselves. I'm like, this is kind of funny because I was thinking like, what do I have that's super sentimental that I would never get rid of? I still have my very first teddy bear. I know that really surprises people, and I'm not sure why. So
But that's okay. Like, I think the whole point
yeah.
of it is it's not preventing you from living your life. And you also bring up something about your father. Like, I had a client that lost a child. I would never be like, you have to get rid of that stuff. And that's a process. The example I use is it took her years to get rid of the crib. This was her last child, so she wasn't going to have any more kids. And I was like, that's okay. Like, don't beat yourself up about it. And you might never be able to let it go. Now, the crib she was able to eventually let go after a period of years because she saw that another baby, a child in need, could get use out of it. But that was a years long process. So I just want to remind people, don't push yourself. I mean, honor your quirks and be okay with that. It's not worth it. It's like you said, it would upset you more to get rid of your dad's eyeglasses than not. And so that's really important to honor yourself and your feelings.
Oh yeah. And I tell myself that too. Like, I honor it. They're going to be with me until I can, maybe one day I'll say, "Oh, this is so silly. Why am I doing this?" And it's interesting that you mention a client that lost a child because, I don't know if, I'm sure someone listening has felt like that as well. And I worked with a lady, obviously more on the extreme end, who had 5 storage units of their only child that passed away's
Oh.
stuff. Oh, I know. I know. I felt like I was just it was hard for me. And this is, it was amazing. She said, "Well, when this happened a few years ago, I would have never even considered getting rid of anything, but the storage unit fees and lack of space at home really were the motivators to let go of this stuff." And it was really nice to be able to donate all this really nice kid stuff, and
Mhm.
we took it around to different places, and now we're researching medical equipment. But it's interesting that she recognized that she was ready, and even though it was kind of a kick in the butt because of the storage fees, I mean, she was
Mhm.
paying thousands of dollars a month to
Wow.
store these items and had been doing so for a number of years. And so it's really hard for people to let go of someone that's passed away's items, especially a child or someone that you're really close to. I mean, it can be painful. And so I just really respected that she knew she was ready and she
Mhm.
called me and hasn't really waffled on any, she said, "I want to get rid of, let's get down to 2." So she knew I'm not going to get rid of everything,
Right.
but I want to get rid of it, 50% or more. So sometimes, you might not be somewhere right now. Like I might not be able to let go of those eyeglasses now, but maybe like, 10, 20,
Right.
30 years, it's like, oh, that's kind of silly.
Right. And it's a process and to be okay to recognize that.
It is a process.
Now, what take actions do you have for our listeners and watchers today? Whatever you feel comfortable with sharing.
Well, I think it would be helpful if people made a list about what was really important to them so that they could see it. Because when you're thinking of it, you could just kind of group everything together, well, anything that's my grandmother's. And it's like, well, anything, there's, old curlers that are disintegrating in the back of this box, so really,
Mhm.
what is it that's important of your grandmother's? And if you don't know, which a lot of people don't, they say, well, I was left a lot of stuff and it's, in the attic or here or there, make a note, put it on your calendar to go through that stuff and see what's in there. Unfortunately, some of the dishes might be grayed and older. Things, some things don't keep well. Some things disintegrate, fall apart, stick together. And so it's time to investigate, what are these items, and make a list of them. And really, I like to make a list and then look at it the next day or a couple days later and say, is this really important? And then the things that are important, use them or give them away or do something with them, give them the respect that they deserve. if they're that important to you.
Fantastic. Now tell people about your podcast, where they can find out more information or whatever else you want to share.
Okay, my podcast is www.hoardganize.com, and they can reach me on there. I've got an email address. There's places to leave a comment. You could find me on YouTube under Hoardganize Podcast, or if you just put in Rachel Seavey, it will come up as well. And feel free to leave an email or a message. I love working with people that are completely overwhelmed with clutter. If you can't move through your house, if you're feeling like you can't have people over, those are definitely the type of people that I love to work with.
Fantastic. And we'll put links in on YouTube and the show notes so people can, you're just a click away.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for having us, Rachel. I appreciate all your wisdom.
Thank you.
On our next episode, we're talking about finding more pleasure. Go out, clear your clutter to create the life you choose, deserve, and desire. When you clear your clutter, you can share your gifts with the world. Sign up for our free newsletter at reawakenyourbrilliance.com. If you've enjoyed Clear Your Clutter Inside and Out, please rate, review, and share us.